Erev Tov Nazareth, Boker Tov Boston, and plain old howdy to everybody else out there joining us on Sunday today for this live stream. Today, our Friends Indeed series is continuing with a live virtual tour of the legendary Masada with our friend, the renowned tour guide, Reuven Solomon, who has guided numerous AIFL delegations over 2 decades in Israel. We also have joining us from around the country, alumni and past delegation supporters from various trips who have experienced Israel. And today we're excited that we have one of the hosts from our Youth Ambassador Student Exchange Program, Earl Demont, who is joining us from Talwood High School in Virginia. And we know that we have other parents and alumni and students from the YASI program who will be calling in today as well. And since we're speaking of high schools, it's a good opportunity to congratulate all of the high school grads from this past week or yesterday or from this past month during the challenge times. Congratulations, mazel tov to all the families and supporters who have high school graduates this year. For everybody on this call, whether on Zoom or on Facebook, we want to ask you to use your chat function to tell us how hot was it when you actually visited Masada. Now that you get to experience it from your home or home computer, you're sitting back, you're relaxed, some of you are wearing shorts. We want to ask you about what you're wearing now, but tell us just how hot it was when you were on Masada. On my last trip in February, I had an anomaly. It was actually cold and raining at Masada, but how was it for you? I see crazy, crazy hot from Linda, and I suspect 100 degrees Fahrenheit from Suzanne, 114 degrees from Rhonda. Yeah, that's my recollection from the trips that I had there. By the way, bonus question for everyone else. What time do you recall waking up when you went on your hike to Masada? Now, if you were on the cable car, you can still answer, but we know that that means you're a morning person. So tell us a little bit about your recollections from your trip. Somebody said there, Sylvia saying her scalp was on fire at 100 degrees. Today, this is going to be a lot more manageable. 115 degrees in 1972. Someone woke up at 4 a.m., Milton, to go on this trip. So clearly people have vivid memories about what this experience was like. We're going to bring all of that alive in a new way today. Look, for everybody who is joining us live, please send in your questions to Reuven, the ones you didn't get to ask or the ones that now that you think about it, you want to get asked anew. For everybody that's joining us on Facebook, you know we have the opportunity to turn this into an immediate watch party and invite other friends who happen to be up and awake and around and looking for something interesting to do on Sunday. So go ahead, turn on your watch party button so that other friends can join us as well. Reuven, I know that you've been itching to do Masada as part of this series. Why was this the one? Why was this the one that was one of your top topics to pick? And why is it such a favorite site to visit for tourists as well as Israelis, local Israelis who visit so often and have such passionate feelings about Masada?
Well, Masada is first and foremost a World Heritage Site for good reason. Some of the ruins on Masada are quite spectacular, Herodian ruins of his building. But what really makes Masada is the story of Masada. The use that this mountaintop has 80 years, 70, 80 years after Herod the Great's death. That's what really makes Masada one of my most favorite sites to visit. As I said, not only from the sites and archaeological point of view, but from its incredible history. So it's a real pleasure for me to be with you here today, to welcome you all. and lovely to know that there are many friendly faces out there, some of whom I'm familiar with, and for the ones who not seeing for the first time, welcome, and I hope you enjoy this tour to Masada that we're going to begin as soon as Wayne gives me the word. Can I take it away, Wayne?
Take it away.
Okay. Well, folks, you know, the first view that one gets of Masada so well fits what Josephus, or Yosef ben Mattatyahu, Josephus Flavius, writes in his book, The Jewish War. And he writes that a mountain with a large perimeter all the way around does not come to a sharp point, but sort of elevated plateau. He writes that it is cut off on all sides by deep ravines, and there is a serpentine path that treacherously climbs its way up to the top of the mountain. Now, just from that description, one traveling towards Masada can look out and see it, because it's such a perfect description of a mountain sort of chopped off at the top, creating that plateau and cut off on all sides. This mountain was always used, we would imagine, through history, but we know from historic records that the first ones to have an actual lookout on Masada were the Hasmoneans, at least the first ones that we have a clear mention of. We don't know how much of building the Hasmoneans actually did on Masada, but none of what they built, if they built much, remains. Because Herod the Great, when he comes to power in 3940 BC, he needs a safe place to leave his family and contingency of soldiers, while he goes off to Rome to get Rome's approval of his kingship of the Roman province of Judea. So he leaves his family on Masada with their food supply and water supply, and when he gets back, after being flanked by Caesar and the Speaker of the Senate, and pronounced the Jewish king of the Roman province of Judea, he comes to retrieve his family and discovers that they have been saved by a miracle. Their food had run out, and their water had run out, and they would have to come down from that very strong hold mountain for water. And miraculously, rainfall saves them from this necessity. When he discovers that, he decides that he is going to build a mountaintop fortress there to defy imagination. If you read Josephus's description, and perhaps I will open the book and read just a few lines of it, of what he does on Masada, it's quite remarkable. He writes, later King Herod devoted great care to the improvement of the place. The entire summit, measuring 3/4 of a mile around, he enclosed within a limestone wall 18 feet high and 12 feet wide, in which he erected 37 towers. From these, one could pass through a ring of chambers right around the inside of the wall, because he builds with casemate walls, double walls, and the space in between these walls used for rooms. He builds palaces. He builds a stronghold, his own private hanging palace, a palace for guests, 2 swimming pools, bathhouses, columbarium to keep pigeons for food, we would imagine. The fertilizer that they would drop would be used to cultivate, as Josephus writes, vegetable patches. You know, you could say, okay, wait a minute. What about food? What about water? Food is easy. You have cheap labor. You use the rock from the quarries that you carve around the sides of Masada and on top of Masada to build food stores, enormous food stores, 21 of them. You can have them stocked with everything necessary, olive oil, wine, grain, dates, and in fact, the provisions stored inside were even more astonishing in their abundance and diversity and in their perfect preservation. These stores included a great quantity of corn, more than enough to last for many years, and quantities of wine and oil with pulse of all variety and dates in great heaps. Now, last for many years because of the tremendous dryness of Masada, that the food stores last literally for decades. Of course, the dates would turn into treacle, but that's great. But food, easy enough. What about water? We're going to talk about that. An incredible water system that Herod the Great installs that stores 40,000 cubic meters of water on a place where the rainfall is pitiful. So we will talk about that when we make our tour in Masada. But you know, Herod the Great built fortresses all over the place. He was a little bit of a paranoid. He had good reason to be. And he wanted places to retreat to when necessary. Josephus tells us Herod the Great actually only spent, apart from the building and the establishment of Masada, after it was all established, only spent 2 visits on Masada in his entire lifetime. But that was Herod the Great. But, you know, I need to tell you that the real reason most people come to Masada is not merely Herod the Great's building, but the incredible story of Masada. Because when Herod the Great dies, none of his sons are really capable of taking over the kingdom the way the Romans wanted it to be taken over. So they are made minor tetrarchs in the area with a Roman governor, procurator, overseeing them. The kingdom, the province of Judea is split into 3 parts. Judea, the Gadarenes, and the Galilee. Herod Antipas gets charge of the Galilee. Philip, his half-brother, the Golan area, the Gadarenes, and Archelaus, Judea. Masada falls in the province of Judea. Archelaus was such a tyrant that even the Romans couldn't stomach him. After a massacre of thousands of Jews, they oust him, Pax Romana, and Judea comes under direct Roman rule. When Herod the Great comes to power, he does his building, of course, in 3940 BC he begins. But after his death, the site, after Archelaus is ousted, the site is managed by a Roman garrison, a small garrison. We are told by Josephus that these folk, this garrison is tricked out of its possession of the site by a bunch of bandits, Sakiri, at the beginning of the Jewish revolt. We're talking about the very early 60s, 60s. You're seeing now Masada on the map as it's situated in Israel, right by the Dead Sea. As you can see, not that far away from Jerusalem. So in the period of the revolt, the beginning of the revolt, some bad guys, maybe 2, 3, 4 dozen of the maximum, take hold of Masada. But you know, we're going to be talking about what happens in 70 AD when Jerusalem, or CE, when Jerusalem is burnt to the ground.
Can I just interject a question?
Most certainly.
So in the period of the revolt, is this relatively early capture of Masada? Is it towards the beginning of the story or towards the end of the revolt?
It's towards the very beginning of the revolt.
And then how important would this capture be in comparison to other places?
It was an important capture from the point of view of what unfolds afterwards, but from the strategic point of view of defending or making any making any headway in the war against the Romans, it didn't play much of a part. It plays the part of a refuge for the hundreds of refugees who are escaping Roman destruction and finding a safe place. So that's.
If I could follow up, if it were packed to its capacity, how many refugees could possibly fit there?
Well, actually, we know that there were 967 Jewish men, women, and children on that hilltop when Masada falls. But Josephus tells us that it was capable, and you can see from the size of it, that it was capable of holding easily a couple of thousand.
Thank you.
So, as I said, when the story of Masada really begins with the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. But before we talk about the story of Masada, there is so much to see there that I want to show you some of the spectacular sites that Herod the Great has built. And this model in front of you, a model of Masada as it is today with its destruction, shows us to the left-hand north palace, Herod's hanging palace, called the hanging palace, not because he hanged anybody there, but because the palace hangs over the northern face of the cliff, and it affords on 3 levels. We'll explore the palace after we talk about the hilltop itself. From each level of the palace, one has an amazing view of the surroundings. Now have a look at the cleverness of Herod the Great. Above the palace and on the northern edge are these enormous storerooms, 21 of them, enormous storerooms where all that food is packed. Where that red dot just disappeared, there is a water gate that one could descend men out to go down to about a third of the way down, where the systems that figure in the water system that I'm going to be talking about, the ingenious water system of Herod the Great, to bring water from there up to the top of Masada. Unapproachable from down below, especially with watchtowers and so on at a sheer cliff, but accessible from above. And you can imagine the hard work of carting water from down there up those stairs, trudging time after time. So it's no wonder that when you read the Old Testament and they talk about the hard jobs that one had, the difficult jobs that one has, the choppers of trees and the carriers of water. And here the carriers of water really had a tough job. But look at the way Herod the Great protects his access to the water, his access to the food, and access to his very private North Palace or Hanging Palace by placing his army, his commander's barracks and his army in cutting off that northern part of Masada totally from the rest of Masada that was opened up to his guests and everyone else. But his private northern section with the army there and the watchtower there protecting his part. The Western Palace was, as you can see on the western side in the middle, where he would house his official guests and unofficial guests, and there were small palaces all the way about. As I said, 2 swimming pools. You can see the large one marked there. The smaller one is to the right of the Western Palace, and even for his guests, a mikveh, a proper kosher Jewish ritual washing site, bathing site, a mikveh on Masada. Now, As I said, even though the spectacular building of Herod the Great is not the only reason we came to Masada, it's here, so we're going to have a little bit of a tour, starting with the Hanging Palace. First of all, a quick look around on this video to see an overall, but I will be able to mention to you what you're looking at, and then we'll go delve into the Hanging Palace itself. You can see how the mountain is cut off on all sides by deep ravines, as Josephus describes. You can see the double casemate walls. Now you see the watchtower of the army barracks. And now you're looking at the top level of Herod's Hanging Palace. His access, incidentally, of course, was not the way that tourists access it today on those stairs that you see, but direct access. Here you see the bathhouse, and here the food stores. We talked about the food stores. We're going to walk through the food stores here. 21 of them, enormous food stores with amphora filled with grain and everything else. The watchtower you just saw. And here we are back at the top of the level of Herod's Hanging Palace. And now we are going to actually see the slides of the palace. You can see the three levels. Top level with all those people standing there. Not all of them want to take that long walk down to the lowest level, but the view from each of the levels, as I said, is spectacular. The top level was the reception area, where you walked into an enclosure where Herod would have his servants serve you with your martini or whatever drink of your choice, enjoying the beautiful view, almost 360 degrees, not quite, but almost 360 degrees around. And then when it would be time to eat, you would come through an internal stairway down to the dining room. That's the middle level, a rotunda, a round dining room where once again the view while you dine would be absolutely spectacular. After dinner, on the way through an internal stairway, you passed by a very small bathhouse. Small when I say for two people. And here you see the rotunda that I was speaking about, the middle level, the dining area. And when it was time to go to bed, you come down to Herod's boudoir, the lowest level, his bedroom area, beautifully decorated. The pillars, of course, would be totally plastered, fooling even Josephus into thinking they were one-piece marble pillars because they were frescoed, stuccoed, and made to look like marble, even though they were actually sectional, stuck together and plastered over. And here you have Herod's Hanging Palace. As I said, called the Hanging Palace, not because he hanged anybody there, but because the palace hangs off the side of the cliff. But there was
Reuven, one of the questions that has come in from Ali, who has several questions about, given that we know so much about Masada from the things that Herod built there, is there any indication, any evidence of anything that was found on Masada of historical or religious significance prior to Herod's building?
Nothing. Nothing. We haven't found any even foundations of Hasmonean or earlier buildings. Herod scraped everything apparently away and started totally anew. So there's really no evidence of previous administrations, although we're certain that Masada would have been used because it's on a very important trade route. One of the trade routes of the spice trade of the Nabateans that would go by its foot. And thus we're sure that through the centuries must have been used as a lookout or a stronghold, but no building, no evidence until Herod the Great did his incredible building. But what I wanted to say about the Hanging Palace is that a spectacular find was found on its lower level, and you will see that again as we move on. Its lower level, his bedroom area, where 3 skeletons were found. I'm not going to be talking about this now, and I'm talking about as late as the 1900s when these three skeletons are found. They figure very much, in my view, of the story of Masada. But here we see the Hanging Palace, and from here we're going to move to our next site that Herod the Great has left us, the bathhouse. The bathhouse, the bathhouse, incidentally, is not in the Hanging Palace. It's in the Western Palace, and we'll have a short video showing you the surroundings and this mosaic. The bathhouse had to be totally kosher, of course. This is where he had even high priests as guests, and thus no graven images. In his private accommodations, he could allow himself a little more leeway. But here, look at the mosaic of geometric and agricultural elements in meanderings in the main room of the bathhouse. One who visits the bathhouse will see that it had several private rooms with baths, very much like the bathtubs that we use today. Look at how much of this was found intact. You may be able to make out the black line, and you will see it again and again in some of the slides, that marks what was found intact as is, in situ, and what had to be built up upon by the rocks that had fallen aside. And thus, the bathhouse of Herod the Great was found in pretty good condition, with much of the original mosaic still in place. But for me, one of the most important and mind-blowing elements of Herod's building was what you see in front of you. This is a model of the water system that Herod the Great creates. The ingeniousness of it is just startling. We talked about how Masada is cut off on all sides by deep ravines. In these ravines, Herod the Great builds two dams in two different levels to trap floodwaters coming rushing down from Jerusalem to the Dead Sea. Every year we have floods by the Dead Sea, and unfortunately casualties sometimes with people swept away by these floods who try to get too close a look at these floodwaters coming rushing down. And he traps these floodwaters in dams. And in closed piping, we found the piping factory, incidentally. It's under Binyanei HaUmah, or today the Jerusalem Conference Center, of a Herodian Roman piping conical sectional pipes that fit together like those buckets that construction workers use to create pipe of clay molds. And in this way, he brings the water up as high as it will go using the siphon effect and the force of the water. But of course, it can't get to the top of Masada. So he brings it as high as it will go, and then with open aqueducts, he circles it around the western side of Masada in two different aqueducts, as you can see. Why? Two different dams, two different water pressures, and thus the height. Along the course of these aqueducts, he digs cave quarries, taking the stone to build with, and once he's exhausted the cave quarries, he plasters them and converts them into cave systems. The aqueducts bring water past them and in cascade fashion fill them one after the other. When it rains in Jerusalem, water comes to Masada, and in this way, in systems like the one you saw, and one can actually walk along these aqueducts and see the systems, in systems like the one you saw, Herod is able to store 40,000 cubic meters of water. Absolutely amazing.
So just very quickly, if I may, if you were to compare this to other technology of the time around the world, obviously this is really amazing. Is the technology comparable to what the Romans had, or is this like beyond what others are doing?
It was the high tech of the Roman technology. Herod actually studied in Rome for a period, and he was familiar with what was possible and what wasn't. That's why we call him Herod the Great. He didn't personally build anything, but while he was in power, he gave the orders and instructions of amazing projects. Last time on our first tour, we talked about the amazing artificial harbor that he has built in Caesarea. Anyone walking along the Western Wall tunnel today sees the enormous stone blocks that Herod the Great knew could be placed halfway up the wall, 600-ton stone blocks. So he had technology. He knew about technology. He knew about marine cement, and he also knew about how to store water.
And then maybe a follow-up, maybe a broader question. I mean, economically, this must have been an immense expense. Where did the money flow in from?
Wow, great question. Herod the Great was one of the wealthiest men of his time. Some people say as wealthy as Caesar himself. And one of the he also had money-making projects. Caesarea wasn't just an emblem to Augustus Caesar, but it was a great moneymaker, because there all produce, all spices, trades, gold coming in from Africa, Asia to Rome, he had his hands on, and taxes and payments and so on. So he was one of the wealthiest men of his time, and labor was quite cheap. Actually, times, apparently, according to all historical records, were quite good for the common people during the time of Herod. They had employment, they had food, and it's after his death that things start to deteriorate.
Thank you.
Reuven, there was a couple of questions came in from Batya about what evidence what else existed sort of in the area. Like, do we know what the level of the Dead Sea was in this period? Do we know if there were cemeteries or other structures in the area, like around the Dead Sea and immediately in the vicinity?
Wonderful question. Because of the lack of water there, apart from Masada, there was nothing in the immediate vicinity. But to the north a little bit, to the south, you go a long way without anything but the Dead Sea. But to the north a little bit was a place where they had a limited amount of water, En Feshcha, of some springs that were slightly salinated water, but not like the Dead Sea. Further up, of course, you had the oasis in the wilderness, En Gedi, where you had fresh water and Jewish township and settlement, even in the Talmudic period, after the destruction of Jerusalem. But certainly in the time of Herod, as well, a town called En Gedi. And further up, of course, we have the Qumran on the way up before you turn up towards Jerusalem, where the Essenes had as Philo the Elder writes, had a settlement in amongst the sulfur fumes on the northern end of the Sea of Galilee, of the Dead Sea of Galilee, wrong part of the country.
And do we know anything about the height or the depth?
Sure. Masada is, the top of Masada is just above sea level, about 35 meters above sea level. Oh, you're talking about the height of the Dead Sea.
Yes, sorry.
If you look around from the top of Masada, you can actually make out by the topography itself where the water once upon a time came up to. Right to the foot of the Roman camps, right to the foot of the Roman camps. So much further up than today. And in fact, even in the 1800s, it came much further up. Anyone familiar with the PEF stone that actually marks the level of water above the roadway that we drive today, much higher than the present level of the sea, of the Dead Sea. So the water was much higher. And it was one Dead Sea and not the North and South Dead Sea as it is today. But you know, any further questions before I move into?
No, keep going. We have a few more, but we'll try to get them in later in the episode.
Terrific. So After having seen some of Herod the Great's incredible building, we want to now talk about what happens to Masada afterwards. 70 AD CE, Tisha B'Av, Jerusalem is burnt to the ground. Before Jerusalem is burnt, in the time of Vespasian in 65-66 AD, Vespasian comes past Masada, looks up and says, there are a bunch of Jews on that hilltop, but they're much too difficult to deal with now. We'll move on and clean them up later. And Masada is left while the rest of the country is decimated. So Masada becomes the place of refuge for some who are able to escape and heard about Masada and make that difficult journey up on top. By Tisha B'Av 70 CE AD, there are 967 men, women, and children on top of Masada. They've elected a leader. Elazar ben Yair is his name. Elazar, son of Yair. And they've decided, whatever it takes, they are not going to succumb to Rome. They realize when they see the fires in the sky and smell the burning, and you would see it from Masada, it was so horrific, the destruction, that they are the last element of resistance in this struggle with the Romans. Titus moves on from Jerusalem after destroying the temple to take over from his father, but he knows he has left behind a bunch of Jews on a hilltop who are thumbing their noses at Rome, and Rome will not stand for it. So he calls his trusted general, family member, Flavius Silva, and he says to him, Silva, I don't care what you need. I don't care how much money you're going to spend. I don't care how many men you need. I don't even care how long it takes. But go over there to that God-forsaken province that we call Judea, where a bunch of rebels are on a hilltop defying Rome, and make sure nothing stands. Flavius Silva gathers an army, comes over and surveys the site. And he recognizes at first that, being a general expert at siege warfare, that he's going to put a siege around Masada. He builds 8 positions around Masada with Roman encampments, links them with a high wall where people might be able to come across and cross over. And in other places, even though impossible to climb down a sheer cliff and climb up a sheer cliff to a Roman camp that surrounds on the other hill, he makes sure to link the camps with a wall, psychological warfare. Where I can place a stone, I can place a soldier. Nothing goes in, nothing comes out. You might as well give up. Well, the Jews answer with psychological warfare of their own. They start pouring buckets of water over the walls of Masada. The Roman soldiers down below have to have their water rationed to them, their food rationed to them. And here the Jews are pouring water over the sides of Masada. Flavius Silva realizes a siege ain't going to work. We're going to have to breach the walls. That's easier said than done. But surveying the site, he builds his camp, his headquarters, right across the lowest part of Masada, where there's a small hill as a backstop, and against the enormous western tower. And he says to his soldiers, okay, guys, this is what we're going to do. We're going to use this hill as a backstop. We're going to pull apart the rubble from the dam and everywhere else and pile it in between this small hill and the western tower. And we're going to build a roadway up on top of this embankment, this ramp. And that's how we're going to breach Masada. You try as a Roman soldier to build while people are throwing even pebbles down at you. Impossible. And we know from the Roman archives that they had a defense against this practice, and it's called the tortoiseshell defense. Ranks of Roman soldiers with their shields held above them, with middle ranks, free to work, would move like a tortoise in one body, while the middle ranks could work protected by the shields of the flanks. That would be very good protection for overhead missiles, but useless for boulders rolled down the side. And Flavius Silva very quickly realizes that his soldiers are not going to be able to build this roadway. So he says, they want to play hardball, we'll play hardball. Bring in a couple of thousand slaves from Qumran, from En-Gedi, from Jericho, and we'll make them build this ramp. Sir, you don't want to build? No problem. Put him on the rack, and he is tortured in the eyesight and earshot of the people up on top of Masada. Madam, you don't want to build? Put her on the catapult. Up in the air she goes. No one to catch her. The Jews up on top of Masada realize that their fellow Jews down below have absolutely no choice but to do the Romans' bidding. Elazar ben Yair has to make a very difficult choice. Kill his fellow Jews or allow this ramp to proceed. Now, this is what takes such a long time. Earth has to be brought in, piled up. Now this earth would roll away unless it was bound in some sort of way. If you walk up, as is possible today, a pathway that the Byzantine Christians, monks in the 3rd century made their way up to Masada, by a pathway alongside this ramp. To this day, you can see the trunks, almost fossilized, but the trunks of palms sticking out the side that were used to bind this earth from rolling away. They had to be brought in from Jericho, from Qumran. And painstaking work. And then you needed a hardened surface for the troops to march up. The hardened surfaces they created by packing down washed out earth. It makes a very good hardened surface. They had a lot of washed out earth from the dam, and thus the name for the ramp, Bianca, the white one, because that washed out earth was white and stands out as a hardened pavement. Even today, even with the erosion, you can see how the whitened earth eroded on the sides of what remains of the ramp, this hardened surface. Now, I don't know how many of you saw the incredible movie of Masada. It was a Hollywood blockbuster a long time ago. Peter O'Toole and I forget the name of the other actor, but it was a very accurate movie, except for a couple of minor things that Hollywood did its way. And one of the minor things was the war machine. The Roman war machine they have built down below and pushed up the ramp. We know that the Romans didn't do things this way. The war machine would have been built on its side, underneath the walls, to be raised when completed. Now, the Romans, I don't know if they invented human shields, but they certainly used them. To build this ramp with slave labor and their soldiers using the human shields, and to build then the war machine, you would require protection from human shields that would be used. Now, what is this war machine? It's a wooden tower that on the lower level has a battering ram, and on the top level, an archer's platform with a drawbridge where you could actually get to the level of the top of the tower. And when this is completed, it is raised, and the battering ram does its work on the very brittle walls of Masada. The walls of Masada are made for battering rams. Well, very soon punches a hole through the stone, the brittle stone, and Eleazar ben Yair, recognizing this, gives his men the orders to quickly go to the Western Temple, the Western Palace, and pull down the enormous timbers that held up the roof of the palace and build a wooden wall parallel to the stone wall. And he tells them, quickly fill the space in between the stone wall and the wooden wall with rubble. And then the pounding of the battering ram simply smashes this rubble into a harder and harder mix. And in the next slide, you will see how this harder mix is sustained by the flexibility of the wooden wall, Flavius Silva was probably close to wit's end when he says, "We got him. The Jews have made a big mistake. They built with wood, and wood burns." And he gives his archers the order to fire their firebrands into the wooden wall. What are these firebrands? Ordinary arrows, but with the tip coated with bitumen taken from the Dead Sea that will stick like putty and stay alight, and fired into these wooden walls. The walls soon catch on fire. Josephus writes something rather curious, that at first the wind blows this fire into the face of the Romans, almost setting alight the wooden assault tower of the Romans. But then he writes that almost by divine decree, the wind turns 180 degrees and blows into the wooden walls of Masada and the wooden timbers of the Western Tower, and it is now clear that Masada has been breached. But the Romans were extremely disciplined fighters, and they did not fight in the dark. And it was starting to be dusk. So Flavius Silva says to his men, "Okay, guys, back to camp. We're going to leave some human shields with some guards here. The rest of you, go back to camp and get a good night's sleep. Let the Jews struggle all night trying to put out the fire. You get a good night's sleep, but first thing tomorrow with first light, you're going to be back up there. You're going to have your hands on them. For 3 years, they've kept you down there in those camps that you see in front of you, in the stinking hot heat of summer, in the freezing cold of winter. For 3 years, because of their stubbornness, you suffered. But tomorrow at first light, payback time. For tonight, a good night's rest." That night, Eleazar ben Yair gathers his people, and they have to make a decision. Here you see the remains of what remains of the Bianca, the ramp, the Roman ramp. And you'll see a couple more slides of angles of the ramp. Here you see a face-on of the ramp and the pathway that runs alongside of it. Right at the top of that hump, of course, is the Western Tower, where the breach in the wall is made. And the war machine, right by the Western Tower, artist's concept, of course. And while you see this video, I want to tell you about Eleazar ben Yair and his very long speech to the people to convince them on a course of action. Now, you know, I'm not going to read you the whole speech. It would take too long. We don't have enough time for it. But I do want to read you the last paragraphs. "Where is the mighty city, the mother city of the whole Jewish race, secure within so many encircling walls, sheltered behind so many forts and lofty towers, chock full of equipment for war, and defended by thousands and thousands of determined men? Where now is the city that was believed to have God for her founder, She has been torn up by the roots, and the only memorial of her that is left is the camp of her destroyers that still occupies her ruins. Old men with streaming eyes sit by the ashes of the shrine, with a few women kept by the enemy as victims of their lust. Which of us, realizing these facts, could bear to see the light of day, even if he could live free from danger? Who is such an enemy to his country? Who so unmanly and so wedded to life as not to be sorry that he is alive today? If only we had all died before seeing the sacred city utterly destroyed by enemy hands, the holy sanctuaries so impiously uprooted. But since an honorable ambition deluded us into thinking that perhaps we should succeed in avenging her of her enemies, and now all hope has fled, abandoning us to our fate, let us at once choose death with honor and do the kindest thing we can for ourselves, our wives and children, while it is still possible to show ourselves any kindness. After all, we were born to die, we and those we brought into the world. This even the luckiest must face. But outrage, slavery, and the sight of our wives led away to shame with our children. These are not evils to which man is subject by the laws of nature. Men undergo them through their own cowardice if they have a chance to forestall them by death and will not take it. We were very proud of our courage, so we revolted from Rome. Now, in the final stages, they have offered to spare our lives, and we've turned the offer down. Is anyone too blind to see how furious they will be if they take us alive? Pity the young, whose bodies are strong enough to survive prolonged torture. Pity the not so young, whose old frames would break under such ill usage. A man will see his wife violently carried off. He will hear the voice of his child crying, "Father," while his own hands are fettered. Come, while our hands are free and can hold a sword, let them do a noble service. Let us die unenslaved by our enemies and leave this world as free men, in company with our wives and children. That is what the law ordains. That is what our wives and children demand of us, the necessity God has laid on us, the opposite of what the Romans wish. They're anxious that none of us should die before the town is captured. So let us deny the enemy they hope for pleasure at our expense, and without more ado, leave them to be dumbfounded by our death and awed by our courage. With this, the people of Masada draw lots, the men, and 10 men are chosen. Of the 10, the shortest straw, one is further chosen. Each head of household takes his family, kills them, and waits for one of the 10 men who have divided the area between them to come and kill him while he is with his family. And then 9 of the 10 men go back to where they have left their families, and that 10th man, the shortest straw, comes to kill them. And then he goes back to where he has left his family, and he is the only one who has to take his own life, a crime considered in many circumstances even worse than killing. We think we know who this guy is. We don't know his name. But you remember the 3 skeletons I told you that were found just outside the bedroom of Herod's hanging palace in such an isolated place that even the Romans did not find the bodies. With CSI today, we can tell a lot. We can date those bones to the period, and we can know the gender and the ages of these 3 skeletons. A man of some 32 years, a woman of 18, 19, and a child of 13, 14, a girl. Obviously, the age difference didn't allow for husband, wife, and child. Perhaps brother and sisters, perhaps husband, wife, and sibling of one or the other. We know one of the women had a hair braid. It's in the museum down below, along with some lots that we found that may have been used in this choosing of the 10 men. We know the shoe size of one of the women. A sandal not dragged away by the animals was found. And we figure that because of this isolated place, where only he needed to know where to go, figures that he would have been the last man on Masada. Now you could say, wait a minute, Reuven, you've told us this long story, you've read a speech, everyone died, how do we know? Not everyone died. Josephus tells us that 5 children and 2 women were hiding in a large cistern. Why? Perhaps the children were orphans. One of the women might have been a widow. The other one we know was not. Josephus goes to great pains to tell us that she was a member of the family of Elazar ben Yair. And she was a very smart woman, a brilliant woman who spoke many languages. And many of us figure that she, at least, was left behind on purpose. Because when the Romans come and find everyone dead, bar the 5 children and 2 women, you can imagine they are thoroughly interrogated. The results of their interrogation are in the Roman archives, right by where Josephus, or Joseph ben Matityahu, Josephus Flavius, has his villa in the Flavius estate, right by the archives where he is able to retrieve the story and relate it to us. Now, I want to say, perhaps the most important thing about all of this visit and the story. You know, when Masada was first uncovered in modern times by the brilliant archaeologist Yigal Yadin, Shmaryahu Gutman before him, but Yigal Yadin, with a copy of Josephus's book in his hand, uncovering the accuracy of so much, one for one, with what Josephus had to relate, this country was on a high. For 2,000 years, the Jews were victims. Kicked out of countries and continents, persecuted, accused of all sorts of things, culminating with the horrific Holocaust. For 2,000 years, the Jews were victims, and now we've got our own country. We're in charge of our own destiny. And look at this story of tremendous bravery, of the fight of the few against the many, of how freedom is valued. And we embraced Masada tightly. But today, we're rethinking the story. And we're rethinking the takeaway from the story. Because if anything, we Jews are survivors. And Masada is a story of end, of non-survival. You know, the world likes to remind us that we in Israel have a Masada complex. Of course we've got a Masada complex. Had Israel lost any one of her wars, make no mistake, there'd be no Israel today. One strike and you're out. So sure, we have a Masada complex. But at the same time, we realize that Masada is a story of end and not of survival. So where do we go from here? My hope and prayer is that we will be strong enough, and I don't mean this only militarily, although first and foremost militarily, because if you're not strong enough militarily in this part of the world, you're not a player at all. But that we will be strong enough militarily and morally to force a middle path, to force a compromise, because Masada must never fall again. Because Masada falling, we know what that means. And perhaps this is one of the best reasons why many of our crack army units, after forced marches of 40 and 50 kilometers towards nightfall, run up Masada, collapse in a heap, and with sunrise in the morning, like many of you out there who walked up Masada to see the sunrise, they have their swearing in ceremony, they get their berets, and they go to the southern end of Masada and shout out a vow to the hills. And the vow they shout out that is echoed back to them, some of you may have done this, is Shenit Masada lo tipol. Masada shall never fall again. Because we know the meaning of Masada.
Reuven, thank you for the prayer and the vision and the touring of this incredible site. We've had numerous questions and reactions from Copenhagen to Kuwait visitors today. And we promised anyone we didn't get to your questions, we'll send those on to Reuven, as he has in the past shared his answers with you and insights and impressions. Look, this opportunity for us to bring a little bit abyssal of the history of the culture of this incredible heritage site is something that we plan to do and continue all summer. We hope some of you will get your travel itineraries ready for when you're able to travel to Israel on your own. But in the beginning, we promise to continue to bring you more and more of the incredible tours virtually with Reuven as your tour guide. Coming up in July, actually July 12th to be specific, is our next tour, virtual tour with Reuven. We'll be heading north. We'll be going back to the Galilee, further north than we went last time. And we're going to Tzfat, one of my favorite places, the birthplace of one of my daughters, as well as the Mountain of Beatitudes. So you're going to hear about another sermon on that particular episode. What's the connection between Tzfat and the Mountain of Beatitudes? No spoiler alert here. You got to come back on July 12th, and you'll get to hear from Reuven himself. Now, there's a lot that's going to happen between now and the 12th and after the 12th. All summer, America-Israel Friendship League is continuing our Friends Indeed series. We have art, we have culture, we have theater, we have music, we have concerts. We are going to bring the spirit of Israel to you, even if you can't get there on your own. And as someone once said, when we asked how hot it was, all they said was schwitzing. So if you're going to be schwitzing this summer, or you're going to be sitting on your couch in the air conditioning, we'll bring you lots of stuff. Next Sunday, June 21st, it's also Father's Day. Not widely celebrated in Israel, but widely celebrated in the United States. And of course, we will have something special for you and the whole family. The whole family is invited to a special demonstration and instruction of Krav Maga with experts in the West Coast of the United States in San Francisco and from Israel, bringing you a very creative option for Father's Day that nobody else is going to have thought of. So if you're looking for something, please grab your mats, look for a place outside, make a picnic. However you want to experience it, we have something really interesting for you. So again, we appreciate your being with us today. We will share a recorded episode of this and our other series for everyone that watched in. And we hope that you'll continue to share this with your friends and family and join us throughout the summer as the American Israel Friendship League brings you on Sundays and on Wednesdays during the week important and exciting ways for you to really share the experience of Israel, even when many of us don't have the possibility to jump on a plane and be able to get and give hugs to friends and family there. So for now, enjoy the rest of your weekend, and thanks to all of us from American Israel Friendship League.